Are you ready for a show that talks sports from the fans' point of view?
We've seen Michael Jordan score 37 points a game in his era. How many could he score in today's NBA?
There's not a player out there who I'd rather have than LeBron James.
Are you ready for a show that isn't afraid to challenge anyone when it comes to sports? If Adam Silver really wanted to fix tanking in the NBA, he would stop rewarding teams by giving them the best chance to win the draft lottery.
I mean, how many times will Roger Goodell drop the ball on handling domestic violence in the NFL?
Look, athletes have every right to talk politics, but if the fans stop tuning in, that's their right.
Then you're ready for Talk Back, a podcast where two fans debate the media narrative and discuss the world of sports as we see it.
Welcome to the show.
It's time for another edition of Talk Back. It is episode 206, finally a regular release. Justin, we are back on our Thursday at 10 a.m. schedule. This episode, though, is all about LeBron James in segment one. And I know our listeners are getting tired of hearing about LeBron James. Don't worry, the NFL is coming. There's lots of things to talk about as far as football. Then we'll get into the fall. The baseball playoffs will be on a roll. And Justin, as I kind of said in last week's episode, there is World Cup news to talk about, as well as the PGA Tour will be heading into the end of their season. Lots of things outside of LeBron James. But for this episode, I sit before you across the studio in my Eagles gear because, well, I just wanted to feel like a winner again. And so I threw on my Eagles sweatshirt. I'm actually a little warm right now, but that's okay. I feel like a winner because LeBron James didn't provide me a victory, Justin. We'll talk about everything that broke down for LeBron James in segment one, what that really means for his legacy. I know you'll lead me through probably some questions that are going to get me fired up. But then in segment two, we've got to talk about Brian Colangelo, the Sixers, really our favorite team, the Philadelphia 76ers. What is going to happen with their leadership? Where do they go from there? Then we've got some golf and World Cup on the episode this week. So right after this, we'll be back to talk about, of course, your man and mine, LeBron James.
It's time for segment one, and I thought we were going to be joined here by an episode of The Bachelor as Eric was professing his love for LeBron James there at the end of the teaser, but we'll try to put that aside here and talk about the important item of the offseason, and that's really the biggest domino out there that's got to fall is where does LeBron James go? But before we can sort of figure out what's the next destination for him, Eric, I kind of wanted to get your take in terms of LeBron's mindset of where you sort of think that is. LeBron will be getting ready to enter his 16th year in the league next year. He's now 3-6 in the NBA Finals. I know we've had this conversation that, at least for now anyways, the talk of the GOAT talk, greatest of all time, all that stuff probably needs to be shelved for a little bit. I think LeBron's probably aware of that. But in terms of his legacy and sort of what's the best position for him to take, we talked about at the end of episode 205 a few days ago, where it doesn't look like LeBron is staying in Cleveland, that's probably not an option for him. But in terms of what's best, is staying the best option? Is going to a top contender and trying to win 2 or 3 more titles before the end of his career the best option for him? Or is it trying to find a team that's maybe under the radar a bit that when he takes his talents to can sort of elevate them into a position where if he could bring that team a title, it would have some more meaning than normal. So when you're breaking down LeBron and sort of trying to get into his mindset, and even as a fan, what do you think and how do you assess that?
This last series was really tough for me and other LeBron James fans. I've talked to many of them, and all of you who you know who you are, you've texted and tweeted and shout back to me on different social media sites. We're all in this together. And
Good Lord, you guys have like a support group?
Well, we need to, because Justin, here's the thing. The talk about him being the GOAT, it's over. As much as I wanted to think that we would get to that point, I just find it very hard to believe that being in 9 finals, which is fantastic by itself, but then only winning 3 of them. The crowd that believes that that is just something that you can't overcome in a greatest of all time type of conversation, I think literally will not be able to be overcome. And so I think LeBron is smart enough, and I think his mindset now at this point, and I think maybe that's partly, the legacy part of it is partly what led to his anger issues in this series, is that I think his heart really still is in Cleveland. I think that was truly what brought him home 4 years ago. I have to take a man for his word, and his word was I wanted to come home and deliver a title to Cleveland. He also said in that letter he wanted to play out his career in Cleveland. So I think there's a big part of his heart, and I think there's a big part of his family's heart that wants him to stay in Cleveland. But I think his mindset now is, look, I'm never going to be the greatest of all time, according to 90% of the people out there. Despite how much ESPN wants me to be the greatest of all time, it's just not going to happen. Even if I were to win another 2 or 3 titles and get to that magic number of 6, the winning percentage within the finals is so bad that it's just not comparable. And so I think now, if you're LeBron James, your mindset is, I'm going to accumulate so many statistics that it'll be Jordan who has all of the titles and a phenomenal career with statistics. I'm going to have a longer career than Michael Jordan with more games and more playoff games and more finals appearances and all of those things, which don't make me the greatest of all time. But I'm going to set the bar so high that outside of Michael Jordan, it's going to be very, very hard for anyone else to ever reach the pinnacle that I've gotten to. And then I'm going to have to live with that. It's very much the same as the way that the broken hand or bruised hand affected his legacy from this past series. Ultimately, Justin, that's something that he's going to have to live with. You asked the question last episode, could the series have been different if he hadn't have done that? And if his hand would have been okay for the other 3 games of the series? And you know what? I don't know the answer to that because it still can't be 1 against 5. But ultimately, LeBron has to live with that. When he lays his head on his pillow at night and knows that, well, that was at least a contributing factor to why one of those finals appearances ends without a title, that's something he has to live with. So to answer your question, if he makes a move and leaves Cleveland, it's just something he has to live with. He's going to have to live with the haters that say, well, you've now jumped again. You've now gone to another team. Does he go somewhere where there's already talent? Does he go somewhere, and we'll talk about the different options, where, it has to be him and then he has to bring in another 2 or 3 guys that he's recruited to sort of build from the ground up for those final years. No matter where he goes, he has to live with the noise that's going to come with it. And I think that's it. There is no other option at this point. He's not the greatest of all time. He has to make the best of what he can at this point, play out his career, and then just accept the consequences.
Staying doesn't seem like it's an option simply because the Cavs roster is atrocious and it's going to be bad for a while. They're going to have to just basically let these contracts bleed out over the course of time, and they're just going to be a bad team for a while. And I look for them, if LeBron leaves, to maybe try to offload Kevin Love to a contender because he has a pretty reasonable deal for the skill set that he can bring to someone else. I think they're just going to be bad. They're a team that is completely capable of tanking for a top 3 pick for a while because you've seen what's on there, how they're strapped with George Hill for 2 more years. J.R. Smith's got years left. Tristan Thompson's got years left. And they're just not talented guys. They're going to have the 8th pick. They may even look to offload that pick to try to get that and Tristan Thompson for something just to try to get themselves in a position for a quicker rebuild. So I don't see how I can stay there and ever think that they're going to win a title, especially when you see Boston is coming. Philly is probably going to be making some noise. So from that standpoint,
teams like Atlanta could make noise because I know they were bad, but they've got a lot of room to play with.
They've got cap money. They've got resources in terms of draft picks. So their road's probably a little bit longer. But yeah, to your point, there's a lot of bad teams in the bottom of the Eastern Conference that if they start getting draft picks and adding talent to, because the league, there's not a lot of free agent money out there. So when these guys start to come up, if they really want money and get paid and they don't really value a title, they may want to go to a place like Atlanta just to get the money and get paid and be the guy. So I think that's the first thing from LeBron is Cleveland's not an option. So then it's what does he want to do? Does he want to go to a front runner? Because we've seen that with Kevin Durant, the backlash that first came out about him. And you talked about last episode of he's basically had to play his tail off in back-to-back NBA finals and be the MVP to sort of even get over that. And even that, people now talk about, well, is Kevin Durant a top 20 player of all time? And I think that's what I teased a little bit last week with LeBron. The pressure is so much higher on him because we have these conversations about being the greatest of all time. There's just a different level of criticism and critiquing that goes in when you want to be the greatest of all time. We talk about that a lot with him when we go back and forth on Jordan and LeBron. And when I talk to other people about it, I'm like, we're not just talking about, player X going from here to there. We're not talking about, Russell Westbrook or Carmelo Anthony or some of these guys where like people don't care if they go to a different team every single year. They're not really that big of a threat. Once they retire, no one's going to talk about them unless they show up on ESPN as an analyst or NBA TV or TNT or something. People just don't care. Even a guy like Kevin Garnett, like people don't care that he left and went from Minnesota and got traded to Boston and then went to the Nets and then went back to the Timberwolves. Like people just don't care because he's not the greatest of all time. So it just kind of gets washed under. But when the scrutiny is there, I think the moves do mean something different. Even when we talk about LeBron, when he went from Cleveland to Miami, then back to Cleveland and now potentially another team. For anyone else, no, it doesn't matter. They're free to do what they want to do. But when you want to be considered the greatest of all time, and some of the people that you're up against, if you're a Jordan guy or a Kobe guy or even some of the older guys like Bird or Magic, those guys stayed with the same teams. Now, times have changed, but when you look back at those guys, it's like, well, what if Jordan in 98 decide, hey, I'm going to go join the Spurs? Or I'm going to go join this Kobe and Shaq Lakers team and run off another 2, 3, 4 titles. So,
Can I ask you an honest question? Because we've kicked this back and forth for a long time.
I don't know.
No.
You talked about your temper at the end of the last episode. I'm not sure where I want to go here.
This is a genuine, honest question because, I think it's important. And if we're going to have this discussion, and our listeners have wanted us to have this discussion, you're right. Bird and Magic and Jordan, those guys, Tim Duncan, those guys stayed with the same team their whole career. The one thing I've always wanted to ask LeBron haters, and I'm not just saying to you, but I'm asking you because you're sitting across the table from me and you represent, a rational and reasonable Michael Jordan contingency. There's other people that feel like, the same way about Bird or, they stayed with the same team for a long time because those teams were really good. Magic Johnson played with a lot of other good talent, as did Larry Bird. Michael Jordan, he had Scottie Pippen and he had some other good players throughout the years. They didn't, I feel like, have as much reason to start the moving process as LeBron did because he played his first 7 years in Cleveland, and other than going to the finals one time and getting shellacked by the Spurs, there just wasn't much of a future there. And so the one argument I've always kind of countered with is that Bird and Magic and Jordan and some of these other guys knew, hey, I've got just as much of a chance at staying with the Bulls or staying with the Celtics or staying with the Lakers to win more titles than I do anywhere else. LeBron, I feel like he had to leave Cleveland that first time because now, and part of this is his fault. Okay, King James, the chosen one, all that stuff. He set the tone for that coming into the NBA from high school. So look, part of that's on him. He said right from day one, I want to be the greatest of all time. And Michael Jordan is, he's the one on the pedestal. But the public and the media, and they're responsible for that too. So now what's happened is LeBron is chasing a way to gain rings, and we crush him for it. But then out of the other side of our mouth, we measure him against guys who have 5 titles and 6 titles. And where's the balance, Justin? That's a genuine question. One of your things is that Bird, Magic, Jordan, they all stay with the same team. I feel like, to summarize, they always felt like that was still their best opportunity to win championships. Now we have a guy who's going to be measured against those guys in terms of total championships, and we crush him for searching for championships.
It's a very fair point, and I think it comes back to, I never had an issue with LeBron leaving for Miami. If you saw some of the stuff last week that Eric and I were on Twitter talking about was specifically with Colin Cowherd and some of the comments he made acting like LeBron has never played with talent. LeBron left a bad situation in Cleveland and went to a Miami team where he had some control in terms of the talent that was there. Wade was there. They obviously had talked to Bosh, and they had come together. And they had a 4-year run where no one had the talent that they had in terms of top-end talent. I mean, they were the
especially
Warriors
in the East,
of
right.
that time, and especially in an Eastern Conference